Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Polls open in New York as the city elects their new mayor. Zohran Mamdani remains the current favourite despite Trump threatening to pull funding. Former US Vice President Dick Cheney dies at the age of 84. British Chancellor Rachel Reeves refuses to rule out tax rises as she provides a preview to the much-awaited budget. And arise, Sir David. David Beckham is knighted at Windsor Castle for his services to sport and charity. Now, voting is underway in New York as the city elects their next mayor. Democratic candidate Zohran Mamdani is the frontrunner, facing off against independent candidate Andrew Cuomo and Republican nominee Curtis Sliwa. Speaking to CBS, the US President Donald Trump endorsed Cuomo and urged voters not to choose Mamdani, threatening to cut funding to New York if Mamdani wins. Take a listen.
Zohran Mamdani, 34-year-old Democratic socialist. He's the
communist, not socialist, communist. He's far worse than a socialist.
Some people have compared him to a left-wing version of you, charismatic, breaking the old rules. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I'm a much better-looking person than him, right?
But what if Mamdani becomes mayor?
It's going to be hard for me as the president to give a lot of money to New York because if you have a communist running New York, all you're doing is wasting the money you're sending there. So I don't know that he's won, and I'm not a fan of Cuomo one way or the other, but if it's going to be between a bad Democrat and a communist, I'm going to pick the bad Democrat all the time, to be honest with you.
Let's cross live to Washington now to speak to our correspondent there, Sarah Firth. Sarah, we just heard from Donald Trump there. At least he's better looking than Mamdani. But let's talk about things. Several US states are voting today, but the whole focus has been on New York. You've just returned from the city. Can you give us an idea as to why the Democratic candidate Zohran Mamdani is attracting so much attention, but also on a global scale?
Yes, Leigh-Ann. I mean, I've just been in New York. As you said, the city is absolutely buzzing around this election. The polls have now opened. And look, Zohran Mamdani has already come out and hit back about what President Trump has said. He was asked, what do you think about the fact that the president thinks he's better looking than you? And he said, well, look, my focus right now is on the affordability of living in New York. And yeah, that's really the platform that he's run on. And it's what we've seen has connected with New Yorkers. The cost of living in New York, in that city, rents are astronomical. It's one of the most expensive cities in the world. And speaking to New Yorkers, that really is the top of the mind as they go into the polls, and it's something that Zohran Mamdani has absolutely pushed in his campaign. We saw him out over the weekend. He was in clubs and bars, and he was out again on Sunday morning. Look, he has connected with particularly young voters in the city who say they are struggling to get by with those astronomical rents and properties simply not available to rent. That message has connected, and alongside it, he's run this really social media savvy campaign, millions of followers across social media. And so it's meant that Zohran Mamdani has gone from a relatively unknown state legislator to the clear frontrunner in this election for New York's mayoral race, according to all the opinion polls. Now, he's up against the former Democratic governor, Andrew Cuomo. He's now running as an independent because, of course, Zohran Mamdani has got the Democratic vote. And then he's also up against Curtis Sliwa. Now, Curtis Sliwa is running on a platform of being very tough on crime. He is the Republican candidate, but of course he hasn't been backed by President Trump. President Trump coming out and endorsing Andrew Cuomo, saying that a vote for Sliwa would essentially be a vote for Mamdani because it would split the vote between Curtis Sliwa and Andrew Cuomo. Look, all eyes are on this race that is happening in New York today as voters go to the polls, and it's already been a massive turnout.
Yeah, absolutely. People are watching this so closely, and you talked about Mamdani there, and I didn't know that he used to be a rapper. So, as you say, he's really appealing to the youth. But you mentioned some key issues such as cost of living, the rents are so high in New York. But what else is driving voters to the polls in New York City?
Well, look, in all the election races in New York, there are some sort of top issues that New Yorkers are focused on. Cost of living, of course, as we've spoken about, but also crime. And another one, immigration. So that crime and safety, what the candidates are going to be doing to tackle that, to make New York safer, that's something that's incredibly important to New Yorkers. Also immigration. A lot of New Yorkers say, they're very sympathetic in some cases, but they are concerned about the strain the levels of immigration have put on resources and services within the city. Now, Andrew Cuomo, he's coming out and he's saying, look, I've got experience, I know how to run the city, I'm the safe pair of hands. That's really the platform he's running on. A lot of commentators here, Leigh-Ann, have said that President Trump's endorsement of Cuomo hasn't done him any favours. He's a fierce opponent in many ways of President Trump. He's come out and said, look, President Trump's endorsement isn't an endorsement of me, Andrew Cuomo, it's an opposition of Zohran Mamdani. And then, of course, you've got Curtis Sliwa. As we said, he is running on this sort of law and order platform. He's CEO of a non-profit vigilante group called the Guardian Angels, whose focus is really on crime prevention in the city. But it is, Leigh-Ann, that cost of living issue that is really connecting with New Yorkers. You speak to them out on the streets. There are people working multiple jobs, paying astronomical rents, they say, for very tiny spaces. And there simply aren't the spaces available for them to rent. So that is really a critical issue that we've seen Zohran Mamdani connect with New Yorkers on, and why he's seemingly so far ahead in the polls. And another point that's worth noting is that Zohran Mamdani has really caught attention for his foreign policy views. He's been very vocal about his criticism of Israel's conduct in their war in Gaza. That's not normally something that would play into a New York mayoral election, but it just goes to show you how different, how polarizing in many ways this particular race has become. Zohran Mamdani coming out and saying today, look, this is a new way of doing politics. It's a new time for politics, and he really feels that he is the candidate to lead New York forward. But of course, people are turning out and voting right now. I can tell you, early voting hit record levels. It was 4 times the number of voters, more than 700,000 New Yorkers casting their votes early. The polls opened early this morning. They're going to be closing at 9. And of course, everyone going to be watching very, very closely as New Yorkers turn out to cast their vote in this race.
Yes, indeed, Sarah, and we'll be watching here too. Sarah Firth in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. We're now joined by former NYPD Lieutenant Darrin Porcher. Darrin, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being with me once again. So, polls have opened in New York City's mayoral race. Opinion polls, like our reporter Sarah just said to me, have put the Democratic Socialist Mamdani in the lead. Is he the change New Yorkers need, and what they are seeking?
Well, when we speak to the top line issues of voters in New York City, they're crime control and the economy. And Mamdani has been somewhat of an energetic speaker that's been able to grasp the grassroots movement of the younger voters, which have come into the electorate and they're voting for Mamdani. That's a plus for him. But one of the challenges with the statements made by Mamdani are a lot of the information is inaccurate. So one of the things Mamdani speaks to is a tax hike for millionaires. That's not something that's done on a local level. It's done by the governor. And the governor has specifically stated she was in staunch opposition to raising taxes on any New Yorkers. The second component would be he's introducing free buses, and the MTA is at a deficit financially. So it's going to be impossible for Mamdani to introduce free bus service to New Yorkers when the MTA is at a deficit. And lastly, the public safety component. The public safety component is essential because we've experienced soaring crime rates in the city of New York. And when you look to the historical statements made by Mamdani, it focused on defunding police and having a limited number of police. And that creates somewhat of a challenge as it relates to public safety in the largest city in the United States.
So it's really interesting because what you're saying to me there basically is Mamdani's running. It looks like he could possibly win this if the opinion polls were anything to go by and the amount of people coming out to vote early on. So are you basically saying that he's put out all of these ideas but nothing can be achieved?
You're very accurate in that statement. The statements that Mamdani are making are not supported by facts. And ultimately, as a mayor, you have somewhat limited control over a budget. And he's speaking to the raising of taxes and things to that effect, and it's just not possible. So the challenge comes into this being a 34-year-old individual that has high energy as it relates to his campaign, and it was able to capture the mindset of a lot of these young voters that are looking to vote for him. And just on another sidebar, President Trump has mentioned that he would limit funding to the city of New York if Mamdani is elected. That's also an inaccurate statement on the part of the president, because the city of New York presents a robust tax revenue to Washington, D.C. as it relates to the federal taxes that New Yorkers pay. And so what Mamdani can do, or any elected mayor can do, is challenge Trump's edict to not fund the city appropriately because the city puts so much money into the federal government. So it's inevitable that the president would be mandated to fund the city in accordance with the tax revenue that's produced by the city of New York.
So let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump. He's not on the ballot, but Trump's name is looming large over this election. He's endorsed Andrew Cuomo, referred to Mamdani as a communist, as he mentioned there, threatened to pull funding from New York if Mamdani wins. Do you think the president's influence in now endorsing Cuomo will possibly sway voters? You're in New York yourself. What do you think? Have you been speaking to people? Who are your friends voting for? Do they care about who Donald Trump endorses?
I think a Donald Trump endorsement would have a negative effect on any candidate in the race, considering Donald Trump's poll numbers are completely at the bottom in the city of New York. New York City is clearly a blue city, and Trump's agenda is something that goes in opposition to what New York City members, or should say, what New York City residents are looking for. This is something that Trump introduced as early as yesterday, and Trump has focused on Cuomo being the lesser of the two evils. Trump didn't believe that Cuomo was a reputable candidate, but he was better than Mamdani. But overall, I think that it's more of a negative as it relates to a Trump endorsement as opposed to a positive that would elevate Cuomo. But incidentally, the poll numbers have changed over the last 24 hours, and it appears as if there's a 5% gap between Mamdani and Trump. And in New York, we've had early voting, and we've had upwards of 700,000 registered voters that have already cast their ballots prior to today being election day, which is a record number for us as New Yorkers. So it remains to be seen, but I think that this is a statistical dead heat more so than the tremendous lead that Mamdani carried in the earlier report.
Darrin, thank you so much for speaking to me. Darrin Porcher there. Thank you once again. British Chancellor Rachel Reeves has refused to rule out tax rises in her upcoming budget as she promises to make the necessary choices. In an unprecedented move, Reeves provided a preview to the media ahead of the official announcement on the 26th of November. The Labour Party previously pledged not to increase income tax, VAT or national insurance in their general election manifesto. Take a listen to what she had to say a little bit earlier.
I will make the choices necessary to deliver strong foundations for our economy. My budget, led by this government's values of fairness and opportunity, and focused entirely on the priorities of the British people, protecting our NHS, reducing our national debt, and improving the cost of living.
I'm now joined by former UK political advisor to the Treasury, Leigh-Ann Gerrans. Leigh-Ann, thank you so much for joining me today. OK, Rachel Reeves delivered a major speech ahead of the budget. It was at 8:15 a.m. this morning, pretty early for everyone. How unprecedented is this for a UK Chancellor? And basically, the question is she in complete damage control mode ahead of the budget in 3 weeks' time?
Yeah, it's very unprecedented, Leigh-Ann. And you know, I can't remember a moment before where a Chancellor has been so vocal on the airwaves. Normally, before a budget, you've got the Chancellor keeping a very low profile until budget day itself. So it's incredibly rare that Rachel Reeves felt the need to set out the economic context, as she puts it, ahead of the budget. And you can tell it was unprecedented because the markets reacted to her giving that speech. The value of the pound did drop as soon as she started speaking, which is quite remarkable. But yes, you are right. This is about political damage limitation from the Chancellor. You know, she spent a lot of time during the election campaign telling everyone that taxes wouldn't rise, and it looks like that is what is going to happen on the 26th of November with the budget. And I think this is designed as part of the political operation within Downing Street, within the Treasury, to try and limit any of that political damage that we're likely to see after the budget.
And it's really interesting because I listened to Rachel Reeves's speech earlier today, and also I've been covering the Bank of England and the government for a really long time in the UK, and I've never seen this happen before. But in her speech, Reeves set out that difficult choices she'll have to make are not of her own making. Which factors did she point to? And are these actually legitimate reasons? Because she seemed to blame everyone else.
She did. I've got a list in front of me here of all the people and all the institutions that she's blamed, from COVID, Brexit, the Tories that went before her, Trump's tariffs. You know, there were a lot of mitigating factors that she outlined as to the reasons why she is going to be forced to make difficult decisions. And I think some of them are legitimate. There's no doubt that the economic global outlook is not necessarily positive for nations like the UK. But I think also, you know, that narrative of blaming everyone but themselves is starting to wear a little bit thin with the public. I think it's okay when you're a new government. For the first few months, you can blame the administration that came before you. But I think in this instance, the Labour Party have been in charge now for, 15, 16 months. And I think people are starting to get a little bit wary that we haven't seen any of the growth, any of the change that was promised on the campaign trail. And I do think that those sort of reasons, those people and institutions to blame are only go so far in terms of how legitimate that is. I think a lot of the public are going to be looking at Rachel Reeves herself and saying, well, hang on a minute, you've had the job for over a year now. Why aren't we seeing any of the progress that you promised? And I think that's quite difficult for her to be able to reconcile ahead of the budget.
So you touched on it there. Let's talk about criticism of Reeves' speech is rolling in from many of the UK political parties. However, the economic climate isn't easy in the UK. It's challenging at the moment. And the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast is also not painting a pretty picture at all, Leigh-Ann. Is this something playing into what's happening ahead of the autumn budget?
Yeah, look, I've got some sympathy for Rachel Reeves. It's not an easy job. There are economic difficulties in the UK right now. Productivity is incredibly sluggish, growth is incredibly small, and we aren't really seeing any movement in terms of economic growth whatsoever. And I think that is difficult for Rachel Reeves, and she does have to balance the books with a difficult economic backdrop behind her. But I think the question that I'd ask is the Labour Party will have known this before they came into power. And the question I've got is, why did they have to include in their election promise that they wouldn't raise taxes? Because I think it was quite clear to a lot of people they'd have to do something, whether that is cut public spending or raise taxes. Those really are only two of the economic levers a government has to pull when it comes to filling an economic difficulty. And I think that had they been more honest with the public, they would have been a little bit more amenable to having to pay a little bit more in tax to fund the NHS, to fund schools, to fund roads. But it's that sense that perhaps they have misled the public, that they weren't quite truthful during the election campaign, that I think is where their real political danger lies.
Yes, it's always dangerous to put things in the manifesto that include tax raises. But just one quick thing, I just want to ask you, we don't have much time left. We've talked about her raising taxes, breaking the manifesto rules. Do you think this will happen? And if so, what taxes will she look at hiking?
I think it will happen. I think that the likely area that seems to be floated by the Treasury at the moment is income tax rises. And that would be quite remarkable. It'd be the first time in 50 years that a Chancellor has raised the income tax threshold. And I think that would be something that would be unprecedented for that time period. And it just goes to show, really, the difficult economic situation that we have in the UK right now, that she will have felt the need to do that. And at the moment, it looks like income tax will rise. We might see a rise in VAT, we might see a rise in national insurance as well. But at the moment, it looks like taxes are going to rise. It's just a matter of which ones.
Leon, she doesn't seem to have a rabbit to pull out of the hat coming up in this autumn budget. But thank you so much for speaking to us. Leon Emirali there. Once again, pleasure to have you on. Staying with the UK now, and British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has visited Riyadh this week as she looks to strengthen ties between Great Britain and Saudi Arabia. Sitting down with Al Arabiya's Rima Maktabi, Cooper spoke about the economic partnership with the kingdom as the two countries build momentum towards a UK Gulf Free Trade Agreement. Take a listen.
Hello and welcome to this interview with the UK Foreign Minister, Yvette Cooper. Thank you for this chance and welcome to Riyadh.
It's lovely to be here.
So, since we are in Saudi Arabia, tell us more about the UK-Saudi relationship, especially when it comes to trade.
Well, this is a hugely important relationship for us. It's a hugely important friendship, a long historic friendship. We already have very strong trading links on issues ranging from energy, security, a whole range of different areas. But we want to strengthen and broaden those trading links. And I've been today in the Riyadh Stock Exchange talking about financial services cooperation, the many different areas that we can strengthen that relationship. Because I know I've known for many years about the work being done here around Vision 2030, and that's why I was keen to see all of the work that's been done and how we can strengthen that trading relationship, that economic relationship, but also that political and diplomatic partnership as well.
And what does the UK specifically want from Saudi Arabia when it comes to trade?
Well, we want to strengthen our trading links. It could be a whole series of areas where we think around life sciences, around technology, around different investment opportunities in both of our countries. We already have 1,900 British companies operating here in Saudi Arabia, and we want to strengthen those links because we think that is good for growth in the UK. It's also good for growth here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but it's good for that trading partnership that we build those links that are so important already.
Let's talk about politics, because also this is one of the very important topic for our viewers and for Saudi Arabia. Sir Keir Starmer said that the UK can use its experience with the Northern Ireland solution and expertise and help in disarming Hamas. What did the US or the Israelis or the Palestinians say regarding this?
Well, as we know, I think we're all of us hugely relieved that the ceasefire is in place. It's fragile, but it is in place as a result of the US-led peace initiative. But there's been a huge amount of work to get to this point, and we know there's a huge amount of work still that needs to be done in order to deliver a just and lasting peace. And that means, for us, that means we have recognised the state of Palestine, because we believe that we need to ultimately have a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine living alongside each other. That's the only way that we will get that peace and security for everyone. But of course, there's crucial issues that need to be dealt with along the way. Part of President Trump's 20-point plan is around the decommissioning of weapons of Hamas as part of that peace process. The UK does have experience of the decommissioning process around Northern Ireland, and that's why we have put forward proposals as part of those negotiations and as part of that peace process. What we've also offered to do is to support things like demining, because we know that there are unexploded ordnances across Gaza. We need to be able to deal with those in order to make it safe to get the humanitarian aid in that is desperately, desperately needed.
If we talk about the Northern Ireland model, which has been discussed all over, right? The model also dictates that Hamas will have a role in Gaza. Is this something that the UK will accept, at least political role?
Well, we've been clear, and it's part of the 20-point plan, but we also made it very clear in all of the statements that we've made that Hamas can have no role in the governance of Gaza or the governance of Palestine. We have always made that extremely clear as part of our support for this peace process, and we believe that is essential to making sure that we can get the just and lasting peace. But we've set out different proposals about how we get that decommissioning, because Hamas has agreed, as part of them signing up to this ceasefire and to President Trump's 20-point plan, that they will demilitarize, but now we need to make sure that there is an effective process to do that.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Former US Vice President Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84. Cheney served alongside President George Bush for 2 terms. He played a key role in the country's war on terror following 9/11 and led the US war on Iraq. Chinese and Russian leaders met in Beijing today as the two nations look to advance ties. Chinese President Xi Jinping said he was looking forward to expand mutual investment and economic relations with Moscow in the meeting with the Russian Prime Minister. It comes as Ukraine steps up its attacks on Russia after hitting a chemical plant in the Ural Mountains. At least 7 climbers have died in an avalanche in Nepal. The incident occurred near the base camp of Yelongri and has claimed the lives of 2 Italians, a Canadian, a German, a Frenchman, and 2 Nepali guides. 2 bodies have been located. The others may be buried under 10 to 15 feet below snow. And Prince William has been presented with the keys to Rio de Janeiro. It's during his 5-day visit to Brazil, attending the annual Earthshot Prize event and the COP30 Climate Summit. The Prince of Wales received the honour from the city's mayor with a bird's-eye view of the Christ the Redeemer statue. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Washington wants flexibility regarding American troops who are stationed in South Korea. Hegseth, who is in Seoul for security talks, was asked whether forces in the country could be deployed elsewhere. He also praised South Korea's plans to boost military spending. Patrick Falk reports.
Day 2 of the US Defense Chief's visit to South Korea began with a military welcome. Ahead of talks to reaffirm the security alliance between the two countries, Pete Hegseth reviewed the honor guard by car before his meeting with counterpart An Chu-bak got underway. The main aim was to map out combined defense readiness against nuclear-armed North Korea.
We face, as we both acknowledge, a dangerous security environment, but our alliance is stronger than ever before. We need to increase our defense cooperation by taking a common sense approach that is grounded in realism.
Speaking at a press conference following the meeting, Hegseth said the core purpose of stationing troops in South Korea was to deter North Korea.
Protecting our ally from the DPRK is what we have been and continue to be oriented on. But there's no doubt, flexibility for regional contingencies is something we would take a look at.
The remark signals potential roles beyond the Korean peninsula as tensions between the US and China are heightened. Seoul has resisted the idea of shifting the role of US troops and is working to develop its own defense capabilities. Defense Minister Ahn also addressed whether or not South Korea would develop its own nuclear bombs.
As a country that has joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Republic of Korea cannot develop nuclear weapons. We must combine our conventional strength with the United States' nuclear capability through the Conventional Nuclear Integration Initiative.
Thunderous round of applause.
Later, Hegseth visited US troops at Camp Humphreys, about 40 miles south of Seoul. The two sides are still working on a joint communique expected to address the issue of defense spending and investments. So far, they've agreed to have South Korea maintain and repair US ships, allowing them to remain in the area and be ready if and when needed. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Now, David Beckham has been knighted by King Charles today for his services to sport and charity. The former England and Manchester United player has said he feels immensely proud. He was joined by his wife Victoria, now known as Lady Beckham, for the ceremony at Windsor Castle. Let's get the thoughts of showbiz journalist Stephanie Takyi. Wow, Stephanie, what a day. This has been a long time coming, hasn't it? Why have we been waiting so long for Sir David Beckham? And he's been waiting so long.
Leigh-Ann, this has been a super long wait for Sir David Beckham. He's arguably one of the best footballers in the world, and his charity work supersedes him. But this has been 11 years in the making. There was first conversations. He was on the cusp of becoming a Sir in 2014. But unfortunately, at the time, he was involved in an alleged tax avoidance scheme, which was later deemed legitimate. But at the time, he was bypassed in 2014. And then 2017, there were those leaked emails in which he took a swipe at the honour committee, because they disregarded him again. But now it's all water under the bridge. And 8 years later, it finally happened today with King Charles. And I'm glad it was King Charles because they've had a quite close friendship, both of them, due to their love of gardening and beekeeping. So I'm glad that King Charles gave him that nod. Also in attendance was Victoria Beckham, his wife, who actually designed the three-piece suit he wore. And his parents were there, Ted and Sandra. And after the ceremony, David spoke about whether they will be calling him Sir David Beckham at home. Here's the clip.
We're just waiting.
If they would like to call me Sir Dad or, or Sir Son, they can. But no, it's going to take some getting used to, people saying it, but no, it's just a huge honour. It's a huge honour to be here at Windsor Castle. It's a huge honour to receive this from His Majesty the King, and it's all round a very special day for us.
Stephanie, I always love David Beckham because he's so honest about how emotional he is, and he always puts his emotions on the line, and we saw that when he played football and when it comes to his family. But we all remember Buckingham Palace, don't we? We remember that when Victoria was a Spice Girl, and now she is officially Lady Beckham, isn't she? And I think this is a great honour for her too. She's always been by her husband's side.
Yes, they are definitely, when you think of showbiz couples, David and Victoria Beckham are definitely up there. You know, they've been married for over 20 years and they really do have a strong union and they've been by each other's sides. Like David has helped Victoria become the fashion designer she has become today. And also Victoria has stood by David's side through all of the controversies in his career. But let's get back to basics, Leigh-Ann. Her name is Posh Spice. So now she actually can back up these credentials. So it's usually offered to a woman, a wife of someone who's become a sir. It's optional, so she could have said no, but I think Victoria Beckham liked the ring of Lady Victoria Beckham. And I think it suits her too.
Yeah, it definitely suits her. But I always remember her being Posh Spice in the Gucci dress. So she's always sort of been, you know, of that ilk. And let's talk a little bit about both Victoria and David, because I have loved their Netflix programs that have been on. They've been really interesting. They've been so successful. We saw David gardening. We saw Victoria preparing for her Paris fashion show. Are we likely to see more of these Netflix series? And also, has this added to their global superstardom? Because, Stephanie, some people are younger than us and might not remember Posh Spice.
Yeah. Definitely, Leigh-Ann. I think there is an appetite for the Beckhams. I think over the past 2 years, like there's been so much focus on both of them due to these Netflix shows, but also in their personal family life. There's been the fallout of Brooklyn Beckham, and then you have their other 3 children who are also growing up. So there's always going to be this attention on the Beckham family. But I think both of them are also heading into different arenas. Like David Beckham, he's just launched a honey fruit-based snack called Be Up, and he's really getting into his green fingers, and he just edited a magazine of country life. So I think there'll be room for him to show this other side to him away from the pitch and also with his charity efforts. And next year is 30 years since the Spice Girls were formed, and there's that big question whether Posh will join them for a tour or a reunion tour or a documentary. So I think for Victoria, it's definitely going to be Spice Girl related, but I think for David, it will be less sports and more about his passions.
Stephanie, I don't know about you, but I will forever be a Spice Girl because I would love to go and see that reunion. 30 years, I just doesn't seem real, does it?
Yeah, it makes me feel old.
Yeah, me too. I was just thinking the same thing. I remember when I had all their tapes, but Stephanie Takyi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Starbucks is selling over half of its business in China as part of a $4 billion deal with investments from Boyu Capital. The coffee chain will have a 40% stake in the Chinese retailer operation and retain ownership of the brand. Starbucks sales have fallen in the Asian market after the COVID-19 pandemic, slower consumer spending and also competition. OpenAI has signed a $38 billion deal to use Amazon infrastructure. The deal with Amazon will give access to NVIDIA chips and run its models such as ChatGPT. In reaction, Amazon stock closed 4% higher, while NVIDIA shares rose over 2%. Turning to all the sports news now, and Grand Slam champion Novak Djokovic will play at the ATP finals in Italy from Sunday. Last year, Djokovic withdrew from the competition due to injury and skipped the Paris Masters. He hasn't played since losing in the Shanghai Masters semi-finals. The ATP finals feature the world's top 8 tennis players. Djokovic has won the tournament 7 times. Jake Paul's exhibition fight against boxing lightweight Gervonta Davis has been cancelled. The decision comes days after a civil lawsuit was filed against Davies by his ex-girlfriend, accusing him of domestic abuse. The fight had drawn significant global interest, with Netflix signing a deal to stream that fight. A reminder of our top stories. Polls open in New York as the city elects their new mayor. Zohran Mamdani remains the current favourite despite Trump threatening to pull funding. Former US Vice President Dick Cheney dies at the age of 84. British Chancellor Rachel Reeves refuses to rule out tax rises as she provides a preview to the much-awaited budget. And arise, Sir David. David Beckham is knighted at Windsor Castle for his services to sport and also charity. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X, and we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.